Hey, what's up, everybody? Championship Leadership Podcast, and today I'm really excited. We got Jason Redman. He is a retired U.S. Navy SEAL, New York Times best-selling author with his first book, The Trident: The Forging and Reforging of a Navy SEAL Leader. His newest book, Overcome, which is amazing. I've been listening to that, and I just love it. Overcome, Crush Adversity with the Leadership Techniques of America's Toughest Warriors. He's married. He's got 3 kids. He's a coach. He's a speaker. He's an author. And he's crushing it right now in life. And I'm just honored to have him come on today to join us. So thank you so much, Jason, for being here. I appreciate it.
Hey, yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. Just 2 veterans having a conversation, right?
Yeah, totally.
Except we got to be careful. Veteran conversations, we start to let the F-bomb strikes fly. So it's always funny when I do other veteran podcasts.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, here to start it off, to kind of kick the conversation off, and I'm excited because leadership definitely is your thing for sure. You're an officer as a SEAL and with plenty of leadership experience, and now you take those and you're taking it to the civilian world and how can we take the lessons that you've learned from the experiences that you've had and we apply that to, because we all go through, like you said, life's ambushes, right? So Championship Leadership is the name of my podcast. What comes to mind for you? What does that mean to you when you hear championship leadership?
Well, obviously, if you look at the word champion, that denotes someone of elite performance. And that's one of the big things that I talk about when it comes to leadership. Peak performance, elite performance, all of us, well, let me rephrase that. Most of us strive to achieve that level, especially in the entrepreneurial space. All of us are looking to achieve that championship level. And that denotes that we are at the top, that we are performing at our peak, and that we are really maximizing everything we do to achieve our goals and achieve what we've set out to do within our business or within our lives. And the interesting thing about that, 90% of the time, our ability to achieve those things always comes back to the main things. I look at all these different influencers, entrepreneurs and coach that are in this space, and we all, for the most part, talk about the same things. We may have different analogies to relate to it, but we all base it off our experience, and it comes down to those basic principles, which are: you have to create structure, you have to create discipline, you definitely have to lead your team and yourself, you have to build a good team of people around you, and you have to build that trust and credibility within your community to achieve that championship status. And the interesting thing about that is all those things apply in the military, no different than they apply in the business world, no different than they apply in the sports world. All those things are what lead to championship elite teams. And that's really what I talk about. I bring to it a very unique experience because one of the things I talk about was a pretty high level failure I had in my career as a leader. And, most people are very uncomfortable talking about their failures. As a matter of fact, most people want to brush them under the carpet and ignore that they happen and focus on all the successes, which is great. But the reality is everybody falls down. Everybody fails at some point. Everybody has setbacks. And if you can learn to look back on those and embrace them and get comfortable in the uncomfortableness of talking about that, that's where your most lessons are learned. And I tell you what, championships, elite performance, and peak performance are built in your failures, and they're built in your setbacks and fall downs. So that is the real perspective that I bring when I come talk to companies. I became a voracious student of leadership after I actually screwed up and almost got kicked out. And it was only after that point that I really started to look at every leader I worked for, the good, the bad, the ugly, and really looked at myself, what I could bring to the table to be a more effective leader in everything I did. Reading all these books I could find on leadership and applying those things into my life where they would work in the different situations that we were addressing.
Yeah, thank you for that. That incredible description of what championship leadership is to you. And when you talk about the failures, it's so true. Well, I get it. Social media, not everyone wants to just hear about your failures all the time, but it's refreshing to see some of that realness and authenticity, that when people are willing to share it and have really nothing about it, just like, hey man, yeah, I mean, we all do. We all fail along the way. You know, you take it to the sports analogy of some of the greatest teams or individuals, depending on what sport they're in, like they win the championships because of the failures leading to it, right? You know, they're taking that adversity, they're taking that experience that they learned in a high level situation where maybe, you know, they weren't equipped to handle it necessarily the way they would have hoped that time, but then it drives them to come back and gives them the experience and the wisdom to then be successful later on in life. And
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it's all about, really is. So if you could, you know, for the listeners that aren't familiar with you and your story, I mean, it's an incredible story. Maybe you could give us a little bit of background on you and what has brought you to where you are today and what you're up to.
Yeah, so it's been an amazing journey. You know, I started out as a very young man when I came in the military. I was only 17 years old when I joined. I joined when I was still in high school as part of the delayed entry program, with a mindset and a vision of being a SEAL from actually even a couple of years earlier. I was about 15 when I decided I want to be a SEAL. And I'm the most unlikely guy, you know, you would probably imagine. I'm not, you know, this great big 6'5" Arnold Schwarzenegger looking guy. You know, I'm 5'8", and I tell you what, back then I was probably only about 5'6" when I enlisted at 17,
Yeah,
and I
right.
probably only weighed about 120 pounds. So I was not what most people would envision. As a matter of fact, I had a lot of people tons of people that told me I'd never make it, including the Navy recruiter when I first went in there and said, hey, I want to be a SEAL. But, you know, thankfully I have something inside me that if you tell me I can't do something, it just fuels my fire to do it even more.
Yeah.
And set off on that path and got to SEAL training. I was 18 when I got to SEAL training, graduated at 19, and went off into this whirlwind career, this amazing career working with this elite group of professionals. At that time, I was working in Central and South America doing counter-drug operations, and just kind of incredible to be so young, you know, 22 years old, you know, taught how to Spanish.
Yeah.
I was a fluent Spanish speaker, and, you know, I'm working with $1 million of equipment, doing, you know, strategic missions down in these countries. And I was good at it. I was good at it.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of fun, but at the same time, there were a couple of things that started to creep up that is always dangerous in young leaders. I see this a lot in professional sports when young men suddenly gain a lot of notoriety, have a lot of money, have a lot of prestige. There are two dangerous companions to walk with, and they are ego and arrogance. And ego and arrogance became a couple of my companions. And, you know, continued to excel, got recommended for a commissioning program, got commissioned as a brand new SEAL officer. And right about the time that occurred, the world had changed. When I went off to school in 2001, it was before 9/11. And while I was at school, 9/11 happened. By the time I came back, all the SEAL teams at this point, almost all the SEAL teams were combat experienced, and we had changed almost all of our tactics. So I had come back from a very experienced enlisted leader, thinking, hey man, I'm the man, I know everything, I'm going to be such a great leader, to a whole new world where everything that I'd learned in the past had really changed. And my ego and arrogance was too proud to admit, hey, this is all new, and I really got to humble myself and slow down, and I really need to learn and you know, admit, hey, I don't know how to do these things, guys. You know, I need to catch up. We need to slow down so I can learn. And I didn't. And it just kind of became this perfect storm where I was making mistakes. I was hanging on too tight and kind of stumbling. And then I turned to something that so many of us do when we're going through these life ambushes. I started self-medicating, you know, hanging out with the boys and drinking too much at night to drown my sorrows because I knew I was screwing up. So instead of already I was damaging my credibility, and I was only further damaging it with, you know, the self-medication.
Yeah.
So all of that came to a perfect storm on our deployment in Afghanistan. I made a bad call on a mission, and no one was hurt or killed due to my call. But I'll tell you what was hurt or killed. It was my professional reputation. It was my, tactical decision making and leadership decision making. And in the military, you all know, Nate, and those out there that are listening, just because you make a bad call in combat doesn't necessarily mean it's such a bad thing, as long as it can be a learning point, and as long as we can take it and absorb it and learn from it. And if I had just humbled myself and said, you know what, you're right, I made a bad call, let me learn from it. But I didn't. I pushed back and was like, you guys are just throwing me under the bus. I made the right call. So all of that kind of led to this point where I had certain people who had been watching what had been going on over the last year, the drinking, the stumbling, the mistakes, and with that bad mission call at the same time. And there were several of those people that were like, hey man, get rid of this guy. This guy's dangerous. He's going to get somebody killed. So I found myself in the most unlikely of positions, a place where I never thought I'd be, which was standing in front of my leadership, explaining to myself why they should keep me and why they shouldn't kick me out of the SEAL teams.
Wow.
And a very humbling, very hard moment for me. And I had some leadership that believed in me and said, hey, you've got a lot of potential. We just need to humble you. We got to bring you back down. We got to flick away your two companions of ego and arrogance and get you back to understanding that leadership is built on, selflessness, on placing the men and the mission all ahead of you. And it's not about you. And thankfully they kind of shook me up, and they, one of the aftermaths of that, where they sent me to U.S. Army Ranger School. And I went to Ranger School, and there's much more to that story. It's
what was the mentality? Was the ego still kind of there? Like, why do I have to go to the school?
It was, absolutely. It was at first. And, because a lot of people are like, oh my God, so when you got a second chance, when they didn't kick you out and they told you were going to Ranger School, were you just like, thank God I got a new day? And no, I was still bitter. And I tell people
no joke either, right? I mean, it
was not, except once again, ego and arrogance. I checked into Ranger School thinking I'd crush it. Oh, this is going to be easy. Okay. I've made it through SEAL training. And it was not. Ranger School is no joke. It is a very tough school. SEAL training is harder. Everybody always asks me that, but Ranger School is a very hard school, and it is a great school. And when I finally humbled myself, and I kind of went through a series of hardships in Ranger School where I got broken down to the lowest level, really hit rock bottom at the beginning of Ranger School. And this whole story is told in my first book, The Trident. So if anybody wants to really get in the depths of how this whole story unfolded, and you really want to peel back the onion on understanding how we look at ourselves and how we understand our strengths and weaknesses as a leader, that is the journey of my first book. And in Ranger School, I finally came to grips with, hey, man, you're not as great a leader as you think you are. You definitely are not adhering to the key tenets of leadership that are going to, A, enable you success, B, enable your team success, and most importantly, C, make sure that nobody carelessly gets killed. And that's one of the biggest things that I started to recognize. So it kind of came up with this idea of, what do I need to do to fix this? Because I recognized I had damaged my reputation as a leader. I had damaged my credibility. And there were a lot of guys who had worked with me on that last deployment. And our community is a very small community that basically said, hey, don't work with this guy. He's dangerous. And thankfully, I had a great leader who brought me into his, my next troop. And he basically said, hey, I don't care what happened in the past. I've heard you've done good things. He said, all I care about is how you lead in the future. And he said, I'm going to give you the opportunities to lead. And he did, but it was a very long, humble road. It took me almost 2 years to really earn back the trust and build back my respect and credibility with my teammates. Found myself in Iraq about the time I really started to earn that trust and credibility back. Very arduous deployment. We were operating almost every night, very active deployment, a lot of firefights, pretty heavy combat. And, but I gotten everything back on track and was ready to move on to the next level of my career. And only 1 week before going home, we went out on a high-level mission to go after the #1 leader for the Anbar province. And I got myself all shot up in a machine gun ambush, hit 8 times between my body and body armor, 2 rounds to the arm that in the moment I thought had taken my arm off. And later, they even talked about amputating my arm due to the damage.
Yeah. Wow.
And then I took a round in the face that did a tremendous amount of damage to my face, lost my nose. So in the blink of an eye, I had walked this incredibly hard journey of, fixing myself on the leadership spectrum and finally redeeming myself and getting back to my career on track. And then suddenly, boom, I'm severely wounded and I'm laying in a hospital bed thinking to myself, man, my operational career is over. I'm going to be permanently disabled and I'm going to be forever disfigured. Mm-hmm. And which was a really hard moment. But I'll be honest, I tell so many people, you learn the most in your failures, you learn the most in the adversity and the setbacks. And this is why I encourage people to push out of your comfort zone and to go after those big goals. And don't worry so much about failing, because you're going to learn so much through it if you're willing to push past it. And that journey I had walked, the leadership failure and earning back the trust and credibility of my teammates, was probably the hardest journey I've ever walked. But it prepared me to be severely wounded. Because when I laid in that hospital bed and I was like, man, this stinks, but I've been through worse. And no different than how you made it through BUDS, no different than how you made it through Ranger School, no different than how you earned back the trust of your teammates. This is how you're going to get through this, medical damage, and how you're going to figure out what the new path forward is. And all that became pretty perfectly clear about, a week and a half after I got into the hospital. I had some individuals that came into the room and basically were talking about what a pity, basically feeling sorry for me and basically saying that I would never have a positive outcome, that I would never be able to achieve success. I'd always be struggling, born on the 4th of July version of the Wounded Warrior is basically what they were talking about. And when they left, I remember thinking to myself, is this me? Is this truly my future? Is this what I have to look for? And I was like, no. In life, we always have a choice. And this is where it comes down to. And this is one of the big things that I talk about. Choose positivity over negativity. Don't let others define you in where you're going to go. And this is an important part of leadership, because it's the same for your team. It's the same for your business. It's the same for yourself. And in that moment, I chose to be a victor and not a victim, not lay there and feel sorry for myself, but instead to shape my own future, even though I didn't really know what the outcome was going to be. I didn't know, would I ever be operational again? Who knew? But all I knew is I was going to keep driving forward and focus on that. And in that moment, when my wife came back in, I said, hey, never again I'm going to allow somebody to come into my room and feel sorry for me. I refuse to feel sorry for myself. And we put this sign, I wrote out this sign to hang on the door. And it said, attention to all who enter here. If you're coming in this room with sadness or sorrow, don't bother. The wounds that I received, I got in a job that I love, doing it for people that I love, defending the freedom of a country I deeply love. I'll make full recovery. What is full? That's the absolute utmost physically. I have the ability to recover, and then I'll push that about 20% further through sheer mental tenacity. This room you're about to enter is a room of fun, optimism, intense, rapid regrowth. If you're not prepared for that, go elsewhere. Yeah. And we signed it, the management,
That's awesome.
Because, I don't know, made sense.
Yeah, right.
And we put it on the door. And it took on a life of its own. It ended up going viral. It went all over the place. It earned me an invitation to the White House to meet President Bush. And it's gone on to impact literally millions of people at this point. But what I tell people is all of it goes back to a choice. And a choice where I didn't really know the future. It was an unknown. But all I knew was I was going to be positive and I was going to drive forward. And look at the ripple effects that came out of that decision. And it can be the same for you, and it can be the same for your business. It may not always be the outcome that you hope for, but it's going to be a positively better outcome than if you lay there and just accept that you're a victim and never get up. So that kind of became the launch point. I started to become known as the Overcome guy. I started getting asked to speak. I launched my own nonprofit to help wounded warriors, and I ran that for almost 10 years after I retired from the military, or during and after I retired from the military. And then, last year I made the decision to phase that down. We were doing a lot of good things, but I wanted to shift my focus to mental health within the wounded warrior community and within brain research. We're just losing too many guys to suicide. I've lost too many friends to suicide, and my nonprofit was not focused on that. So I looked for some that were and said, hey, I want to support you guys. And then I made the full-on switch to the leadership and resiliency training and started writing my second book, Overcome. So all of that is within the last year. And that's been my journey and where I'm at, trying to help people be the best version of themselves so that they can lead themselves and their companies to better success.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. I really appreciate it. Give some context to who you are and what you're all about. You talk a lot about choices, right? I mean, the decision, made in Afghanistan that you talked about that truly affects you, where you're at and what you're doing, going to Ranger School. I know you kind of skip over it a little bit, but you walked out on Ranger School. You attempted to walk out on Ranger School after failing Land Nav. Again, ego in the way. Listen to the book to like get these stories. You end up in the hospital, people are coming in and they're like feeling sorry for you and they're talking almost like you're not even there, right? Like you can't hear. And I remember in the book you talking about your wife coming in and like, man, naturally you're like, what is she gonna think? How is she gonna feel? How's she gonna react? And of course she, not of course, but in your case, like she came in and like did everything she needed to do to be there with you no matter what was going to happen. Like she's your soulmate. She's by your side, right? She's going to be there for you, with you, like through anything. And, you put up the sign, even your nonprofit organization and the adversity that pops up through that you talk about in your book, that where they're, talking about trying to get you off the board or to leave the company, to resign the company, like all these things like that you had to overcome, and like the choices, you talk about the choices that you've had to make. And it's just so, and those choices will always be there. Like you're always going to be confronted with those, and how you react to one definitely is going to impact and affect future choices that you have as well, and how you choose to stand in those moments and stand up for yourself and what you want and what you're all about starts to really impact others as well, positively or negatively. And in your case, absolutely from this very powerful, positive manner of, man, what an example to live by and to be led by as a leader. But I know, like, it's not easy in that moment, is it? Or is it?
No, it's absolutely not. And it's not always this snap decision either. And I think that's an important thing. I mean, I see some people out there that they see the world in black and white. And I sometimes have a bad habit of seeing the world in black and white, but there's always a little bit of gray. And sometimes it takes time, and there's nothing wrong with that, but what I tell people is that, as long as we're always looking at how do we get off that X, as long as we're always looking at how we, how we lead ourselves and lead always. I mean, the perfect example of this morning. I mean, in some ways, I'll be honest, I kicked myself a little bit this morning when I didn't get up at 5:30. I mean, it was just exhausting.
Yeah.
But I tell people, you also got to pace yourself. This is a long life. It is a marathon, and there are going to be times that we need to sprint, and there are going to be times that we need to slow down and pace ourselves and kind of evaluate what's going on around us. And in the grand scheme of things, I could probably kick myself and say, hey, you didn't stick to your structure and discipline this morning. But at the same time, that may reap better rewards for me by taking care of myself after a pretty arduous several days of speaking and traveling.
Yeah.
So, you have to find that balance in leadership. But at the end of the day, what I tell everybody is choose the positive over the negative, and look at how we're always moving the needle in our lives, and always look at Have I set goals for myself? And do I pull my compass out on a regular basis and say, am I still on course? If
Yeah.
you're off course, here's the great news. You can get back on course. It's
Yeah, I
never
love it.
too
Yeah,
late to
right.
get back on
Yeah.
course. But so many people, they get so far off course that the next thing they know, they're not getting up early, and months and even years have gone by,
Yeah.
and they're so off course, but never too late to get yourself back on course.
Yeah. Well, you talk about getting off the X, and I definitely want to get into that, but there's also something I want to talk about as well, because I think it's powerful, especially inside of leadership. As if you're in the military, if you many of these listeners are entrepreneurs, business owners, trying to figure this thing out called life, and how to be successful and create the life they want, the lifestyle that they want, and make the impact that they want to. And just a powerful quote that I've heard you reference a few different times through a video, through your book. A leader, a championship leader that impacted you. He said, people will follow you if you give them a reason to.
Yep.
And, maybe talk a little bit more about that and where you were at, and just how, it seems like it was a really critical moment, something that really definitely changed your course a bit from where you were headed.
It did. And in my opinion, it is probably the most succinct and sound leadership advice I'd ever been given. And even to this day, I think it truly summarizes leadership.
Yeah.
I teach 3 rules of leadership that I encourage people to follow. And 80%, so the 3 rules of leadership are number 1, you have to lead yourself. This is the most critical rule of leadership. And really 80% of leadership is leading yourself. If you
That's a huge one, right?
are,
Like I don't want to glance over that real quick, because it all starts with you. Like, if you can't lead yourself, how are you going to go lead someone else?
exactly. And how can people trust in you? How can people want to follow you if you lack structure, discipline, if you're an emotional basket case? I mean, all these things come back to you. Yet I meet so many people who, when they think of leadership, they're focused on rule number 2, which is to lead others. But they confuse leading others with telling others what to do and managing others. Yeah. When the reality of leading others, it's motivating and inspiring them to be successful, and giving them the tools to do that. And a lot of that started with rule number 1. You're motivating and inspiring them through your actions. That's what already getting them, which goes back to what, Vince Peterson had said to me, people will follow you if you give them a reason to. I don't care how much someone has messed up. If suddenly they come back and they get themselves back on course, and over a period of time, and granted, if they messed up pretty good, it may take some time. And there may be a group of people that will never forgive them for the mistakes they made. I mean, that's just part of life. Yep. But the vast majority of people will hear, oh, that guy messed up. Holy smokes, he's an amazing leader. I mean, I'd follow that guy because he always does the right thing. He's always positive. He's always making sure that the people around him are taken care of and that we're accomplishing what needs to be done. People want good leadership. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. So it applies. And then rule number 3 is you got to lead always. You can't pick and choose.
It's a responsibility, right?
Yep. And maintaining that positive mindset, just recognizing that, this was a mistake that really damaged me in those years that I was self-medicating by drinking. That definitely was not leading always. I was severely damaging my credibility as a leader, because we're not looking for leaders who lose control of themselves and who, make an ass of themselves. Yeah. We're looking for leaders who lead. And that's why you can't just take off your leadership hat when you decide, I don't feel like being a leader at all. Now, don't get me wrong. There are going to be times you need to blow off steam, but it needs to be a very controlled environment where you're around trusted people, and maybe it's only your own family. And even then, you're a leader within your family too. So I'm very careful of, for me, I've really cut back on, almost any of that kind of stuff. I just kind of focus on how do I drive forward and move the needle in our lives.
Yeah, no, thank you. I love those 3 rules. Powerful. Talk to us a little bit about get off the X. So, you talk about this definitely in the book, Overcome, and getting off the X from life's ambushes, right? So if you could maybe talk about that a little bit for the listeners.
Yeah, so I survived a pretty vicious enemy ambush, and ambushes are designed to absolutely overwhelm the individuals who are in the attack point. And that attack point, we call it, excuse me, that attack point, we call it the X. And the idea in an ambush is to pin the enemy on the X and to try and put as much overwhelming firepower and explosions and everything you can to pin them down, that either you injure or kill them, or if nothing else, they just get overwhelmed to the point they lose their will to fight. And I'd spent my entire adult life learning how to do that to the enemy. And then on September 13, 2007, I found what it felt like to be on the receiving end of that. And it is an incredibly uncomfortable feeling. I will be honest. In the first few minutes of that fight, I really wanted to be able to go, hey, time out, guys, stop shooting. This sucks. But life doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And what I began to realize as over the next 12 years working with wounded warriors, working with companies that have been through failure, crisis, implementing massive change, and working with individuals that have been through traumatic events in their lives, people do the same thing. They get overwhelmed. They stop functioning. They're in denial on what's happening, and they get pinned on the X. And what I began to see is the longer you sit on the X, the harder it is to get off of it. And whether it's a physical ambush in life, a personal ambush, or whether it's a business ambush, it's the same. You get stuck on the X. So basically, I took all the principles that I had learned in special operations and started talking to people about, hey, everybody gets ambushed in life. Yeah. We all have these unexpected attacks, these unexpected incidents that come along, whether it's you find out your spouse is having an affair and says, hey, I want a divorce. That's a life ambush. Or, you go to the doctor and the doctor says, hey, I'm sorry, you've got cancer. That's a life ambush. Or you suddenly, in the blink of an eye, lose a loved one to an auto accident. That's a life ambush. Or like in my case, you get sued over a business deal. That's a life ambush. These are all life ambushes that can pin you to the X. But if you can learn to be proactive in your thinking, if you can learn to have a step-by-step process to deal with that, it will enable you not to be overwhelmed and freeze and get stuck on the X. It will enable you to get into that mindset of, I have to get off the X as quickly as possible. Because you talk about championship leadership, what I've come to find over the last 12 years, whether it's in the military environment or whether it's in the civilian environment, people, teams, organizations, the individuals that get off the fastest are the ones that thrive. They are the ones that consistently achieve championship levels. They are the ones that consistently achieve elite performance, because most people, when they get into ambushes, they waste a whole lot of time on blame, on focusing on what they lost, on sorrow, on pity, on all these wasted emotions and this wasted time. Whereas elite performers and champions, they immediately go, it doesn't matter why this happened. All that matters is that we get off the X as quickly as possible and drive forward. And that makes the difference between elite performers and the average company or person who just sits there and feels sorry for themselves. And either A, never gets off the X, or B, it takes them so long that everybody's left them behind.
Yeah. What's it like for you to, as you might be working with someone that's gone through a major life ambush that you just talked about, a business that's going through one of these moments in their business, but yet you kind of see the light go on and then realize and then be able to implement the things that you're talking about and teaching and telling them about. Like, what's that like to see that happen to make that difference, that impact?
It's awesome. And it's happening all the time. I mean, whether it's a business or more often it's an individual, oftentimes when I speak or somebody reaches out to me on social media and just says, man, I cannot thank you enough. I watched your video, or, I just read your book, and, I've been stuck on the X because of X, Y, or Z that happened to me in my life. And your REACT methodology, a step-by-step process to get off the X. They said, I needed it. And, thank you. I'm finally starting to move forward. So, it's exciting. It's just neat to know that, I got a second chance and I'm trying to pay it back, and it's neat to see the impact of that.
I can imagine. I always love asking this question. I know we might have even talked about some of these situations already, but When I think of championship leaders, I think of like they have a great vision for where they want to go, and it's like the vision. It's one that they can see that not many others can see, and then also with that comes like, oh, what are you doing? What are you thinking? Why would you do that? Because, for whatever reason, right? And a lot of people want to try and keep you from going down that path because they don't think it's the right play. It's not the safe play. It's not the guaranteed play, whatever it might be. But yet a championship leader will have the courage to make the decisions that they know are right for them in those moments. And is there a moment for you where obviously you did make that decision to take that path because it's got you right where you are today? But yet, like, had you made the opposite decision, you could be somewhere very different in your life.
Yeah, I think the most pivotal decision that I've ever made was to stay in Ranger School out of my entire life, and it would not have happened if it hadn't been for the fact that Captain Vince Peterson hadn't been on the other side. The Ranger Colonel had not known him. I mean, you talk about a fate God moment. I was firmly convinced that I was leaving the military. I had even called my wife that night, said, "Hey, I think my career's over. I failed this."
It would have been over there, right?
I'm done.
I mean, it would have been done.
Absolutely. I mean, the SEAL teams don't tolerate failure.
Yeah.
They don't tolerate quitting. They'll accept failure if you failed and just messed up, but it's a whole nother thing to quit. We don't tolerate quitting. And that's what I had done. I had quit. And I was ashamed of it. I won't lie. You nailed it. My ego got in the way. Yeah. And even though as soon as the words came out of my mouth, I was like, what are you doing? Yeah. But if it hadn't been for that moment where he had, convinced me and said, hey, because I told him, when we were talking, I said, hey, the guys will never follow me again. I've messed up too much. And that's when he gave me that advice. People will follow you if you give them a reason to. He said, go cross this school, finish Ranger School, finish strong, come back to the SEAL team, start leading, stop focusing on what others think and focus on you leading yourself. They'll follow you if you give them a reason to. Yeah. And that was kind of the light bulb that went off in my head. Hey, it's never too late. We can always fix it. You may not win everybody over, but you'll win the majority over. And that's all that matters in leadership. So, and that was the turning point. But I'll be honest, if that had not happened, it'd be a whole different path. In 2005, I would have been out of the military, and I don't know. Who knows what I'd be doing? Maybe a Walmart greeter or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. As we start to wrap it up here, I want to, do you have one or two things that you could share with the listeners that, like, if they took it and put it into action today for their life, it would help them to move forward?
Yeah, I teach three things. And actually, this is a brand new thing, Nate. Awesome. I actually introduced it for the first time at my presentation I did in Vegas on Saturday. And it's something I've been playing with for a while. Acronyms and things that stick in our head are always a critical thing that we can easily implement. And it is about leadership. So what I tell people is, anyone can learn to lead. I meet so many people who are like, oh, I've messed up too much, or I'm too far behind the power curve, or I don't know how to lead. I'm not a good leader. All the excuses in the world. I can't run a company because I'm not a good leader. Anyone can learn to lead. And if you follow these principles, and LEARN is an acronym for leadership. So the first one, the L, stands for the 3 rules of leadership. You got to lead yourself, you got to lead others, you got to lead always. And in my new book, Overcome, we get pretty deep in depth on how those things apply. E stands for you got to engage your teams through trust. This is such a critical component because, once again, when we build teams, we have a natural tendency sometimes to have, as a leader, to have more of an authoritarian idea of leadership. I'm going to tell you what to do and I expect you to do it. But if you provide your people ownership of the goals and the vision and where you want to go, and then you trust them to execute it, there's going to be so much more buy-in in your company. Push that decision making down to the lowest levels, and you will grow so much faster. So much big companies have so much bureaucracy and they don't do this. So engage teams through trust. A, active communication. So many leaders are one-way leaders. They put out information, so they communicate, with putting out information, although even some leaders are really bad at that. They don't even put out information. But the flip side, active communication, is it's a two-way street. We're listening to what our people are saying. They're telling us, hey, we're going down this road. We're hitting these roadblocks. Okay, well, how do we fix that? Active communication, a critical part of leadership.
Yeah.
R stands for respect. Respect the position of leadership. Man, it is an honor to lead.
Yeah.
So respect that position and respect the people you lead all up and down your chain of command, man. Every single person you have plays a part in your organization. So make an active habit of thanking them, respecting them, giving them praise. And for the flip side, they will respect you even more, which leads more strength to your organization. And then the last one, N, there's no shortcuts to being a good leader.
I love it. No magic pills?
No magic pills, man. There's no shortcut, and that was the mistake I made in Afghanistan. I thought that I was, hey, look at me. I'm going to be this great leader. Here's this shortcut. I'm going to go down and save the day. And the real world doesn't work that way. It's not a Hollywood movie. It is sustained superior performance over time is what makes great leadership. Experience is what makes great leadership. You're going to fail. You're going to fall down. Get back up and drive forward. The faster you get up and get off the X, the more respect your people are going to have for you, and own it. Just own it and recognize there's no shortcut. That's how you learn to lead. Apply those things, and I guarantee you'll be a good leader too.
Incredible. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. I love it. Thank you so much. What's real quick, where are you headed? What's ahead of you next 5 years? Like, what's the impact you want to make? Difference you want to make? What are you looking to do over these next 5 years?
So there's more books out there. I mean, I want to get out there on a national level. I mean, I'd like to get at the same level as, get national at the same level. I'd love to hit the same level as Jocko. So I love Jocko. I got my sights on Jocko.
I love Jocko.
He's doing some great things, and I'd love to get into the business world on the same side as that. I'm launching new coaching and consulting programs, and just getting out there and trying to get a regular name, get this phrase into people's home, teach them how to get off the X, how to react and overcome, how to learn to lead, all these things that I know are going to make them better. There's a lot of people that focus specifically on one single thing, hey, I'm going to teach you how to make more money, or I'm going to teach you how to be in better shape, or I'm going to teach you how to, I don't know, have a better relationship or things like that. But the reality is there's a deeper layer. None of that stuff matters if you don't know how to lead yourself, build structure and discipline, because all those things come back to you. Yeah. How do you build and lead yourself? Yeah. So anyways, that's my goal in 5 years, is to get the Jason Redman brand out there on a national level, where companies and individuals say, man, I love what this guy's teaching. It's making a difference in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. No doubt you would do that. So thank you so much for being here. What are a few ways? Well, yeah, like how can we get the books? Like how can we follow you and find out more about what you're doing, and get a hold of you if they want to work with you and bring you on to their team for leadership and everything that you offer?
Absolutely. So I got 2 websites, although you can get to them the same way. JasonRedman.com is my main speaking website. So if you want to learn more about me coming in and speaking for your company, motivating and inspiring, go to JasonRedman.com. From there, it'll take you getoffx.com, and that is my coaching and consulting website. And it's there that also we have our online store where I've got Overcome products, and we've got the books. Overcome, the book, has not been available for signed copies yet, although later this week or the very beginning of next week, that'll go live, because we've had tons of people asking for that. As a matter of fact, it's going to be a pretty cool bundle where we had 1,000 specially made book coins, and actually this is one of those coins. If you can
give me one of those. Look at that. I like it.
So it's got all my sayings on one side, and every coin is numbered. I don't know if you can see the numbers, but they're numbered 1 to 1,000. We only had 1,000 made. And so we're doing a book bundle. You get a book and you get a signed book and a coin. So that'll be going live next week. And when those coins are gone, they're gone. They're limited edition. I will not buy anymore.
I love it, man.
So there you go. That's all. And then I'm active on all the socials. Instagram is definitely the one I'm most active on. So follow me at Jason Redman WW. I put out good content, good motivational, inspirational content. A lot of people are really loving it. Every Monday I put something out called Monday Muster. It's about a 5 to 8 minute video on Monday mornings I put out, and it is all about a motivating, positive, forward driving mindset and how we start the week off right to crush it, crush those goals, and make sure we're on course.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate you being here. I've had a great time, and thank you for sharing everything that you have. And I just appreciate it.
Nate, awesome, man. Thank you. Hey, man, keep doing what you're doing. We need more champion leaders out there. I mean, hey, man, it's never too late. If you're listening to this and you think you're off track, hey, man, pull out your compass, get back on track. Anyone can learn to lead. Anyone can get off the X. You can do it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, man.